introduction like that, I almost passed the plate. I was like being at church. I'm going to share a couple comments, but first off, I've said this to Dan in private, but I'm going to say it to you now. Someday, not today, but someday, a year or two from now, there's going to be a textbook that some kid's going to read in history somewhere. Well, these days, I guess it may not be a textbook, it may be an iPad that has it on. But there's going to be a chapter on political courage in America. And at the top of that chapter is going to be a name, and it's going to be Dan Campaign. Really, there are a few people, not just in politics, there are a few people in life who are willing to make the potential kind of consequences, say, you know what, I'm going to do what's right no matter what, unforeseen circumstances, and Dan, that, I mean, as long as I still breathe on this earth, I'll never forget the kind of courage you've had and continue to have, and we thank you on behalf of not just this business, but this state, and in many ways, I'm going to talk about in a minute, this country. So thank you. I'd be remiss in not commenting about Mike Hipsch. Mike and I served together for many years in the Assembly. If anybody doubts, and Bill was right in talking about many great leaders here tonight. But when you think about it, for me, I got a great gift. I am blessed. I think I would argue, person for person, no better cabinet in the country. What we have in the state of Wisconsin right now. The guy I depend on, and it's literally the morning after the election, Valerie knows this, Mike was in the transition office literally on November 3rd, helping me start preparing for the state budget so that we hit the ground running. We were ready to go long before January 3rd, in large part because of Mike Hipsch and his leadership, and I appreciate that. Now, as was mentioned, Tonette and I are here tonight, and we always love coming to the Cooley region. And Mike's told me over the years, God's country. It's always good to be back. I was here earlier for a couple stops, signed some bills up on Granddad's Bluff, and was over at the Wisconsin State Patrol at their graduating class. To my knowledge, I don't think they've had the governor in the last 10 years come there, so it was kind of fun to be here in La Crosse, just down the way a little bit with that graduating class, and to thank them all. But it's always good to be back in town. But Tonette and I are here tonight. We're really honored to be here. It's one of those crazy days where after a year I was up in Stillwater, where we had a little celebration with folks on either side of the St. Croix for the bridge that we worked about 30 years in trying to get done. We finally got done earlier this past year, and a great testament to just a great working together of people like Sean Duffy and Ron Johnson and others who stood up and helped us get that done, along with people like Michelle Bachman on the other side of the Stillwater Bridge. But Tonette was giving out an award in River Falls for her Wisconsin Hero Program to join me so that she comes here before we go back to Wauwatosa tonight, so I can be on my way up to Kapana after that for an early morning event. But we were glad to be here. But a number of you asked me earlier, how do you put up with all this? You know, for Tonette and I and the boys, I mean, we've had protesters not just in front of the governor's mansion, we've had it in front of our house, we've had our kids targeted Facebook, we've had all sorts of things, you know, that we've had to deal with, and threats, and you know, all this nonsense out there. So how do you deal with it? And I said, it's real simple. And a number of you said it to me tonight. It's your prayers. The prayers, not just at Republican events, we appreciate them here, not just at Chamber of Commerce events, but I got to tell you, every time I go around the state, and Governor, you know this, the more you get out of Madison, the better off you are. It's true. Every time I go out, Doesn't matter if it's a factory or a farm or small business. Heck, I go to factories that are union shops, and the guys come off the line, stop their equipment for a minute, and say, "Hey, Governor, me and my wife, we're praying for you. Hang in there. You're doing the right thing." The other day I was in Green Bay up early doing a morning TV show before I was speaking at a tourism conference, and the floor director for this TV show, a woman came up to me, and she was helping with the mic, and she whispered in my ear, because in the news media you can't always say things like that. She said, "Governor, every night me and my 2 kids sit down on our knees and we pray for you and your family." And it's moments like that that make you realize it doesn't matter what happens to the Capitol. It doesn't happen when a few people hold a temper tantrum. The reality is the people in this state understand what's important, and what they care about is more about what happens under the roof of their own house and the house of their neighbors than what happens under the dome of the Capitol in Madison. And as long as we stay focused on those hardworking people, we will prevail in this effort. About this, both Mike and Dan talked a little bit about it, but last year, we came in and we acted quickly. Part of the reason why it was so key to get Mike and some other key parts of our cabinet in even before January 3rd was we knew we had a fiscal and economic crisis to tackle. When I was running for governor, I viewed it as a job interview, and I spent 18 months crisscrossing the state, talking to the people who were the interview committee, the people of the state, the voters of Wisconsin. And I said, we face an economic and a fiscal crisis. And then I proceeded to tell people what I do to tackle it. And the amazing thing is they still can't figure out maps in the media. For weeks after I was first elected, we'd have these transition press conferences. They were bewildered because they kept waiting for me to tell them how I was going to back away from my promises. They couldn't understand that actually someone in the Capitol now was going to do what they said they were going to do. But I said, that's why we got elected. That's what we're going to do. I remember I went to the Assembly and Senate Republican caucuses and said right after the election, it's put up or shut up time. For us, we got elected because people wanted something different than the mess they got under Jim Doyle and Senate and Assembly majorities that were in the hands of the Democrats. And so that's what we gave them. In the first month, we called the legislature to special session. We passed some of the most aggressive pro-jobs agenda in the country. Lowered the tax burden on job creators. Lowered the tax burden on property tax creators. The regulatory burden, so what we enforce is about common sense. Pull back on frivolous lawsuits. Repeal the state tax and health savings accounts. We did that all right away. Why? Because we wanted to send a message when we said Wisconsin's open for business. That's not just a slogan or a sign or a banner. That's not just the change I made out here on the sign that says welcome to Wisconsin when you cross the river, and instead of my name, it now says Wisconsin's open for business. We wanted to prove it. It's working. It's working. After the 3 years prior to my taking office, when Democrats controlled everything in this state, during that time period, we lost 150,000 private sector jobs. In 2011, we stabilized things, and in the last 2 months, we've had consecutive months of job growth. Our unemployment rate is now below 7%. It's the lowest it's been since 2008. Action right away because Wisconsin couldn't wait. We couldn't wait to have a study committee or a blue ribbon commission or a panel. We needed leaders who were going to stand up and take on the crisis. And that's what we did. We took action right away, and it's working. We got a long ways to go. We got more to do, even at 6.9%. While that's better than the national average, well, that's a heck of a lot better than they are down in Illinois or other surrounding states. We still got a long ways to go, but with your help, we're going to move our state forward. You see, it's not just where we're at today, but it's where we're headed. We've got a number of good data points come out in the last couple of weeks. Last week, Manpower, nationwide, good Wisconsin-based company, did a survey of employers and pointed out in the next 6 months, no state in the country is projected to grow at a faster rate than the economy here in the state of Wisconsin. 3 times as many businesses are going to grow as those are going to stop. The other day, the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia did its projections. They looked ahead for the next quarter as well. And they said the same thing. They said, Wisconsin's one of those states that's ready to grow, ready to take off. We're heading in the right direction. And for us, it made sense. You see, when you change the mindset for the people that actually create jobs, not the government, but the employers of the state, the people that actually create jobs, they're going to respond in kind. 2 years ago, when I was running for governor, statewide chamber does a survey of job creators. You know how many thought we were heading in the right direction back then? Just 10%. Think about that. 10% of our employers answered yes to the question, do you think Wisconsin's heading in the right direction? That same survey was conducted beginning of this year. Results came out about a month and a half ago. You know what that number went to? 94%. Now, I'm competitive, so I want to know what's wrong with the other 6%, right? I got to get out there and get them. They had union deals or something like that, I don't know. But I look at that and I say, we're heading the right direction. Don knows that. We talk about this a lot on the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. We got companies ready to go. We got more lined up. We got more good news on the horizon. So we're not done yet. We got to do more to get this state going in the right direction. But fixing our economic crisis, putting the power back in the hands of the people and not in the hands of the limited few in the capital, wasn't the only thing we've done in this last year. We knew if you're going to put your house in order, that means your fiscal house as well. So even though a year ago we inherited one of the biggest budget deficits per capita in the country, $3.6 billion, we balanced it. We balanced it without raising taxes, without laying off massive numbers of public employees, without cutting core programs like Medicaid, and without the budget gimmicks that Jim Doe and his allies had used in the past to balance the budget. Instead, we did it the old-fashioned way. We put in place long-term structural reforms that helped us balance not only our state budget, but our local government budgets for years to come. Now that's worth thinking about for a second, because I'm sure some of you have friends or neighbors or folks you go to church with or others who are maybe a little up in the air about this election. You know, maybe they've been distracted a little bit about some of these attack ads or other items out there, but make them think about it for a minute. You see, Wisconsin wasn't alone. Last year, nearly every state in America had a budget deficit. Nearly every one did. And so we had a choice. The choice wasn't yes or no to our reforms. The choice was, if not what we did, what other poor choice was out there. Illinois. Because if you look, amen to that, that's where I'm headed. You're ahead of the curve. If you look at Illinois, I often like to point out other states made poor choices. Illinois just happened to make all of them at the same time. But think about it. You could raise taxes. We decided not to. Illinois raised their taxes 67% on individuals, 46% on business. In fact, it got so bad that jobs and wealth have left that state in such mass that now a year later the budget crisis is even worse than it was before. In turn, they've had to lay off thousands of public employees because they shut down 14 state facilities, including a prison and a mental health complex. On top of that, they cut more than $2 billion from Medicaid. That's a program that provides for needy families and children and elders in our state. We added $1.2 billion. That's why we can afford to ensure that people are on things like family care and legitimately on Badger care. But we also put in place reforms so those that could move on and could move back to jobs in the private sector aren't on there permanently. We made choices that were about higher priorities than those other states. You know, Illinois, others, Minnesota for a while actually made such a poor decision. They shut the government down and laid off 22,000 public employees in the state. We didn't do any of that. We made long-term structural reforms that allowed us to balance our budget for years to come. So I like to say in the Capitol, we thought more about the next generation than we did about the next election. And isn't that what you elect us to do? I think the most important thing we did is something you hear about the least, at least in the media. You know, certainly we did things to help the economy and to help our fiscal house get back in order. But the best thing we did, the thing that has the most lasting impression upon the people of this state, is that we made the government work better for the people we serve. No better example of that than in public education. Think about it. For years, Tonette and I have 2 kids in a public high school here in the state of Wisconsin, and yet we're property taxpayers. Normally, that means we're at odds. Property taxpayers and people care about the schools. Well, that's a false choice, isn't it? That's a false choice. Nowhere else in life do you say, you know what, we're going to pick, either higher prices for our product or cut the quality off. You don't do that. You find a way to put it all together. You find a way to, in business, whether it's Lean Six Sigma or Lean Manufacturing, Total Quality Management, you make it all work. We couldn't do that before this past year because we were locked into something called collective bargaining. In our case, we showed that you can have great schools and you can protect property taxpayers at the same time. It's not about adding more resources. It's about being better stewards of the taxpayers' dollars we have in the first place. That's what this is about. And let me give you a good example of that. For years, school districts all across Wisconsin had to buy their health insurance essentially from just one company. Companies that just happened to be affiliated with the teachers union. After our reforms, school districts all across the state, here and everywhere else across Wisconsin, can now buy their health insurance by bidding it out to anyone that gives them the best deal possible. School districts have saved tens of millions of dollars. That's money that goes directly into the classroom. That shows you can have great schools and still stand up for the hardworking taxpayers at the same time. That's what it's about. Let me give you one other example that goes beyond just budgets. See, a couple years ago, back in spring of 2010, a young woman, school district actually on the other side, the other coast of Wisconsin, over along Lake Michigan, young woman, brand new teacher in a large urban school district, was named the Outstanding Teacher of the Year for the entire state of Wisconsin. Now this is a troubled school district. It's a district where we've tried to do all sorts of things. We've done choice, we've done charter. There's a few good schools, but many times they're troubled. And so having a teacher of that caliber, someone who's named Outstanding Teacher of the Year for the entire state, is exactly the kind of person you want in that district. About a week and a half later, she got a phone call. She got noticed. Well, it wasn't about when the award ceremony was. It was she got noticed that she was being laid off. Now, why is that? Well, under the old system of collective bargaining, if there were any changes in staffing, it didn't matter how great you are. If you're the last hired, you're the first fired. If you're the last in, you're the first out. Under collective bargaining, seniority and tenure trumped over even the best new Outstanding School Teacher of the Year. I'm here to tell you happily tonight that because of our reforms, seniority and tenure are no longer in our schools and our local governments. Instead, we can hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can keep them there. Don't let anybody say we're not pro-education. We want to put the best in our classrooms. We care about kids and we care about education because we want to measure that performance. We want to do something about it. I said the best testament to that was as I was holding a listening session on jobs and the economy and took questions from the crowd. One of the guys that got up at the very end was a school superintendent from a small school district. He identified himself, and I said, hey, it's 50-50. He either loves me or hates me. It all depends on his politics, right? Well, thankfully, he loved us. He said, your reforms helped us save money. We hired more teachers. We lowered classroom size. And then he started to sit down in his seat. And as he was sitting down, he said, barely loud enough for me to hear, he said, Governor, the best part about what you did is I get to go back to my office and focus on curriculum instead of worrying about grievances. As you can imagine, I said, come back up to the mic and say that again. Because I wanted everybody in that room to hear that. The best thing about what we did was someone like him was able to go back to his office and think about curriculum instead of worrying about grievances. You see, one of the most frustrating things for this last year is that the National Teachers Union has come into the state and somehow not only told the public, but told our educators that me and others who support this reform don't like teachers. I don't care much for the teachers union, but I got to tell you, some of our closest friends, some of the people we care about the most are teachers, and I know, the teachers I know, the people I've known throughout the years are some of the most decent, most outstanding people I know. And the overwhelming majority went into education because they care about kids. They want to inspire our children. They ultimately want to put them in a position where they can excel. But somewhere along the line, that dream got hijacked by their teachers union. Our reforms empowered them to go back to the inspiration they had to get into education in the first place. We should never apologize for what we do. What we do is pro-education, it's pro-kids, it's pro-teacher for those who really care about the ultimate results. So think about this. In just over a year, our reforms have helped turn the state's economy around. We're not done yet, but have put us right on the right track. We get the private sector back out front again. We put our fiscal house in order so that we've had long-term structural reforms that balance our budget without raising taxes, without massive layoffs, and most importantly, make the government work better for the people we serve. Now, normally, in any other state, in any other circumstance, that'd be a pretty compelling argument for re-election, wouldn't it? And yet in a couple months, I'll be only the third governor in American history to face a recall election. Why is that? One word. Union. Well, that's close. I'd say money. That's about union money. Public sector union money, because I think there's a distinction, because there's a lot of private sector union guys that support what we're doing. What we did when we made this change was we said very simply, if we're going to ask public employees like me and Mike and others, if we're going to pay a little bit more for our pension, a little bit more for our health care, then ultimately we should give every employee, every public servant, the nearly 300,000 good, decent, hardworking men and women who work for our states and our schools and our local governments, we should give them the freedom to choose. The freedom to choose whether or not they want to be in a public union or not. And you know what? We also said we're not only going to give the freedom of choice, we're going to prohibit any level of government from automatically deducting those dues from your payroll. Well, that's what's got me crazy. You see, the big government union bosses from Washington don't like that very much. Because if you're a school teacher in some of our districts who pay almost $1,400 for the state and local dues, and you suddenly now have a choice, and you might like to say, you know, instead of spending it on my union dues, I might spend that for my pension contribution or my health insurance premium, or God forbid, they might set some of that money aside for their kids' college education. No matter what the choice, they may choose to spend that money and keep it for themselves instead of handing it off to the big government union bosses. They don't like that. They don't like that here, and they certainly don't like that in Washington. We saw the effect of that last year in this part of the state. We saw that in the Fox Valley. We saw it in places all across the state. In total, $44 million was spent trying to defeat 6 Republican senators. $44 million. More than half of that was against Republicans. The vast, vast, vast majority of that was spent by big government union bosses. Now some have said, not Republicans, but some observers have said there could be as much as $70 to $80 million spent between now and June 5th. That's big for New York. It's big for California. Those are numbers we've never seen in the state of Wisconsin. That's for them what this is all about. For us, it's about one word as well. It's not about money, it's not about unions. It's about something more fundamental than that. See, to me, it's ultimately about courage. Sure, this will give you clap for that. Don't get me wrong, this without a doubt will have a political impact. I mean, when we prevail, this will send a powerful message around the country already this summer. And when we win, this will set up a powerful network to help not only the nominee for president, but to help us elect a new United States Senator. And you're blessed tonight because you're going to hear from what I have said nationally is the most impressive, most dynamic set of a Republican primary for the United States Senate that we've seen not only in this country this year, but I think probably in history. You've got an impressive choice of United States Senate candidates, and I'm convinced that we can win and get that seat back, which will be key to us winning the United States Senate and holding a majority there. And I also believe it'll be key to keeping us in the House, because I think Sean Duffy and Reed Ribble will benefit from the success that we'll have in June 5th and how that'll carry the way in November. All those things are important. More important important than what happens between now and November is what happens after that. And that's why, for me, this is about courage. You see, because when we prevail, and I believe we will, don't get me wrong, I'm not sitting back. I know that we need every one of you. We were talking tonight. One of the folks that joined me did what? What'd she do? 13,000 calls. I mean, it's unbelievable. We need that kind of dedication. We're going to need that. We're going to need help in getting the message out. We're going to help with phone calls and lip drops. We're going to help financial contributions, not just the big end, but the, 75 or actually 76.5% of our donations in the last report where people gave us $50 or less. So it's not just big dollars coming in from around the state or some other state, it's all over the place. But the most important thing we have to win this election is the truth. We get the message out about the truth, I'm convinced we'll win. And that's important because that win, that victory, when we prevail, will send a powerful, powerful message, not only in our capital, but I'm convinced it'll send a message all across America. In Springfield, and in St. Paul, and in Annapolis, and Columbus, and in state houses all across the United States, and in particular in places like Washington, D.C., where people like our friend Paul Ryan are trying to do equally courageous things for our federal government. We need people to understand that if you stand up and you do the right thing. I mean, think about this. I tell crowds, not just Republican crowds, I tell mixed crowds all the time, I say to people, how many of you ever complain about politicians who get into office and then fail to have the courage to stand up and do what we all know needs to be done? How many people complain about it? How many of you heard friends or neighbors and co-workers who you know aren't necessarily Republicans, but who complain that politicians don't do what we need them to do once they get in office? What we're doing is about doing the right thing when you get into office. When we prevail, that'll send a powerful message all across America, not just here in Wisconsin, that if you're willing to do the right thing, if you're willing to make those tough decisions, there'll be people willing to stand up with you and support you and guide you all the way through. And Lord help us if we fail. If we fail, this isn't just about who the governor of Wisconsin is. If we fail, this will ultimately send an equally powerful message to anyone in politics in America today, not to take on the tough choices, to put aside any sort of courageous action, I believe, for at least a decade, if not a generation. That is why we must not fail. Now, I'm an optimist. I believe with hard work and determination, I believe as I crisscross the state, there are people who are pumped up, and I believe the majority of people are on our side. The only way we lose is if we don't match momentum. You see, unfortunately, on the other side, anger is a powerful motive to show up at the polls. We don't have to match that with anger. We have hope. We have aspiration. We have the truth. But we've got to make sure that we motivate enough people to be inspired to go out and show up on June 5th, an odd day and an odd time, to get to the polls. Not just to help me, but to help 4 other state senators who are facing recall elections around the state of Wisconsin. Now, ultimately, let me just close with this and let you go, because you've got an impressive list of folks, and we've got to be on our way around the state as well. But I believe we will prevail. And I believe it not just because of the hard work and determination I've seen here in La Crosse County and western Wisconsin, the Cooley region, and around the state, but I believe ultimately, in my heart of hearts, I love history. It's in our DNA as Americans. It's who we are. Now, I grew up in a small town, and I got to tell you, I didn't get to travel a lot. My dad was a preacher, so we didn't have a whole lot of money. We usually, if we could take a trip, it was in the back of our white and polished station wagon. It would only last about a day or two to get away. We couldn't go any further than that, so I never got to places like Washington or Philadelphia. But last September, Tonette and I got to go to a governor's conference out in Philadelphia. I loved studying as a kid, so we got up early in the morning, went out with the National Park Service, saw the Liberty Bell, and then I went to Independence Hall. If you've ever been to Independence Hall, you know it's about maybe half as big as this part of the room. Not very big. Now, going in there was just exciting for me, because when I thought of our founders, I thought of people who were like bigger than life. Like superheroes. I mean, really, that's how I thought of them as a kid. Maybe I'm odd, but that's how I thought of them. And I thought of our founders as really almost supernatural. And when you stand in that room, particularly as you look up, you know, where Washington sat with the chair with the half-rising sun, and you look at the room and you look at the chairs, you realize these were ordinary people, sitting in ordinary chairs, just like we're sitting in tonight. Ordinary people who did something quite extraordinary. They didn't just risk their political careers. They didn't just risk their businesses. They literally risked their lives. Their lives, the freedoms we hold dear today, and too many of our fellow citizens take for granted. These were people, remember when Ben Franklin? Well, I don't remember it. I remember reading it. Lloyd Benson would say you remember that, but I remember reading as a kid about Ben Franklin, about how important it was to stick together on this. Remember that quote? We all need to hang together, or surely we'll hang separately. These were people willing to risk their lives for freedom. The reason I tell you that tonight is because I believe moments like that affirm to me that we will win. We will prevail, not just on election day, but in this fight, because I believe what has made America great, what has made the United States of America an exceptional country, arguably the most exceptional, outstanding country in the history of the world. The fact that in the moments of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, in the moments of greatest crisis in our nation's history, what has made us great is in those times we've had men and women in leadership positions who had the courage to think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about the futures of their own political lives. And they had people all along the way, at those times, in those places, in those jurisdictions, who were willing to stand up and support them when they were willing to make those tough choices. That has made America great in the past. I believe even more, now more than ever. This is one of those times. This is our moment in history. This is a time when we can look back and say, we didn't just win an election for governor in Wisconsin. We can tell our kids and our grandkids, this is one of those moments when we help shape the future of our country and head down the path towards freedom and prosperity. Thank you so much for listening.
Let's get my wife married.